So today we're going to dive into the life of a truly monumental figure from the 19th century Bengal Renaissance. He was a scholar, a reformer, and honestly, a man full of fascinating contradictions. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. And to really get a sense of his impact, just listen to this quote from the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. I mean, that one sentence says it all, right? It tells you just how legendary, how almost larger than life Vidyasagar was. So, who was this man who could inspire that kind of awe? Well, let's start with where his famous title even came from. See, Vidyasagar wasn't his birth name. It was a name he earned, and it came to define his entire identity, forged by this relentless, unstoppable drive that started when he was just a kid. So that name, Vidyasagar, it literally means ocean of knowledge. And this wasn't just some cool nickname his friends gave him. No, this was an official title and honor bestowed on him by the prestigious Sanskrit college because his intellect was just that vast, that profound. And believe me, it was a name he absolutely lived up to. You know, his early life is the stuff of legend, seriously. Born into a family without a lot of money, he moves to the big city at just 9 years old. And that famous story about him studying under the streetlights because he couldn't even afford a lamp at home, it's not just a story. It's real, and it just shows you this incredible burning desire for knowledge that drove him to master everything from grammar to astronomy by the time he graduated. So, what does this ocean of knowledge do with all that intellect? Well, he channels it into one of the biggest, most important social battles of his era, fighting for the basic human rights of Hindu widows. And you have to understand, Vidyasagar was looking around and just couldn't ignore the incredible suffering he saw. In 19th century Bengal, when a woman's husband died, her life was basically over. She was forced to shave her head, wear plain white clothes, and was treated like an outcast, a burden. Vidyasagar saw this for what it was, a terrible, profound injustice. And this right here shows you the kind of mountain he was trying to climb. When he started a petition to the government to legalize widow remarriage, the conservative establishment fought back hard. They launched their own counter-petition and got nearly 4 times as many signatures. Just think about the sheer guts it took to stand up against that. But get this, he didn't back down. Not for a second. He pushed, he argued, he campaigned relentlessly. And through his sheer force of will, he won. The government passed the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act in 1856. This was a seismic shift, an absolutely monumental victory for women's rights in India. And it happened almost entirely because of him. But Vidyasagar was just getting started. He wasn't a one-issue guy. His vision was so much bigger. He wanted to modernize the entire fabric of Bengali society, and he knew you couldn't just tackle one thing at a time. And here's what's so brilliant about his approach. He saw the whole picture. He knew you couldn't just change laws, you had to change minds. So he simplified the Bengali alphabet to make reading easier for everyone. He was a huge champion for educating girls, helping to start one of the very first schools for them. And he kept fighting against other horrible practices like child marriage. He understood that language, education, and social customs were all connected. Okay, so the picture we're getting is pretty clear, right? A champion for the oppressed, a forward thinker, a true progressive. But, and this is a big but, Vidyasagar's story isn't quite that simple. It gets more complicated. And that brings us to something really complex, even challenging, about his philosophy, a part of his story that really forces you to stop and think when you look closely at his own writings. And here it is, right here in a letter he wrote in 1859. The government was proposing a new policy for mass education, and Vidyasagar argued against it. He's basically arguing for this idea called the downward filtration theory. The thinking that if you just educate the elites, that knowledge will somehow, trickle down to everyone else.
And this is where things get really paradoxical. He argued that education should be for the higher classes, and at one point even dismissed a student from the goldsmith caste because, in his words, they stood very low. But here's the kicker. His own first school was funded by a wealthy man from that exact same caste. The irony is just, wow. The man who tore down so many social walls seemed, in this case, to be building them up.
But wait, because the story takes another twist. Because if you look at his actions, especially later in life, they seem to scream the exact opposite of that letter. He spent the last 18 years of his life not hobnobbing with Calcutta's elite, but living among the unprivileged Santal tribal community. And what did he do there? He built a school for girls, opened a night school for adults, and even ran a free health clinic. So, what are we supposed to make of all this? The fierce reformer who championed widows but argued against mass education? The scholar who spent his final years serving the poorest of the poor? This right here is the puzzle, the very heart of his incredibly complex legacy. So how do people remember this complicated man today? Well, despite all these contradictions, his importance is undeniable. Get this. In a 2004 BBC poll, he was voted the 9th greatest Bengali of all time. That tells you just how profoundly his positive contributions still resonate. And when you look at his life's work, you can see why. This timeline is just packed with landmark achievements, from his early days as a top scholar to driving massive social changes like the Hindi Widows Remarriage Act and the Age of Consent Act. His work completely reshaped society for the better. And his legacy isn't just in history books. I mean, you can literally see it today, built into the landscape. There's a huge bridge in Kolkata named after him, a university, countless colleges, postage stamps, even a classic movie about his life. His name is everywhere, a constant reminder of his immense influence. So, we're left with this question, aren't we? Vidyasagar's story isn't some simple fairy tale about a perfect hero. It's the story of a real man, an ocean of knowledge and compassion for sure, but also a man of his time, with all the complicated views that came with it. His life makes us think, really think, about how we look back on historical figures. And maybe what it teaches us is that real greatness isn't about being flawless. It's about the messy, relentless, and often contradictory struggle to make the world just a little bit better.